everyone. My name is Ken Mejia-Beal, Chair of the Democratic Party of DuPage County. And tonight's guest for our chair chat is Congressman Sean Casten. Congressman Casten, it is an honor to have you here. We've known each other for, I don't know how long, some time. And it's just been a great thing to watch your career. So I'm happy that you took a little time to join us this evening.
Pleasure to be here. I still don't quite know what to make a career. It seems like it was just a couple of days ago. We were sitting there trying to learn how to knock doors in the campaign office.
And look at us now. So my first question for you right out the gate, if you had to tell me one bill that you are the most proud of, which one is it and why?
So let me tell a little bit of a story on that. When I was first campaigning, I'm the environmental guy. I'm the guy who campaigned on climate change, and everybody said, "Why aren't you supporting the Green New Deal?" And I was doing a thing at one point, and a certain high-profile senator, who I shall not name, was standing in the room with me, and I said, "If you promise to eliminate the deficit by 2030, people would laugh you out of the room unless you said how you're going to do it. And if we promise to eliminate CO2 emissions, but we can't say how we're going to make steel without metallurgical coke, how we're going to make fertilizer without natural gas, how we're going to make silicon without coke, how we're going to make cement, it's not a serious plan. You have to have a way to get there." And said senator then said, "Well, I'm really kind of embarrassed because that's a really good point, and I hadn't thought of it before, but I'm a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And we have a good relationship now, but that's just a sign of me not being very politically savvy and reading the resume of my fellow colleagues." Fast forward, I get elected, and I'm sitting there talking with science committee staff that I serve on, and I made the point to them, and they said, "That's a really good point. Why don't we do something about it?" So we wrote a bill to set up an agency within the Department of Energy, put $500 million into standing up that agency and deploying the projects, called it the Clean Industrial Technology Act. We brought it out of committee. We didn't have a floor package, but then found a way to put it into an end of the year budget bill. I'm sure he wasn't aware of it, but it was signed into law by Donald Trump. And he didn't have it funded. And so then in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, we got it funded. And and so this is in, going from something dumb but true that I said in a meeting early on to $500 million in deployment going out the door. I'm proud of it, but it's also I just feel so fortunate to have a job where you can sit there and say, there's a really interesting policy thing that I feel like people are talking about the wrong way. And then have staff that can say, okay, let's turn that into legislative text, and then go get it signed in and out the door. And there are grants out right now. If anybody's listening who has a really cool idea on how to deploy that technology, there is money waiting for you to deploy that technology. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Something you mentioned, it kind of leads into my next question when you mentioned text. So speaking of text, what are your thoughts on the recent leak from the Supreme Court that threatens to overturn Roe v. Wade? Most of my initial thoughts, like all of us, are fury and outrage, and then trying to channel it into something constructive. I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but I'm getting pretty fed up with the United States Senate. We saw this coming when the court, before the leaked Dobbs decision, when they took the decision in that Texas ruling, basically not to block this vigilante justice rule. We came forward with the pro-choice caucus to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. We passed that through in the House. Boy, it's probably 6 months ago. That would provide all the protections of Roe, but codified in law so the Supreme Court couldn't take it back. That's been sitting there waiting for the Senate to bring it up for 6 months. We saw this coming, right? When the leak came out, I got a bunch of my colleagues together and we said, look, we can do the math. There are nominally, depending on where you think Joe Manchin is, 51 to 52 senators who say they are pro-choice, because we got Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. You needed 60 votes to break the filibuster. So we made some noise. We put a letter together, got 122 of my colleagues to sign in a letter asking Chuck Schumer just to call a vote to get rid of the filibuster so that we could then actually vote on this. And they didn't do it. They said, well, we've tried that before. We tried it on voting rights. It's a vote that divides our party. So they brought the Women's Health Protection Act to the floor. And it didn't clear cloture. I forget if we got 47 or 48 votes. But the point is, it didn't have enough. So the Senate, when the Senate says we couldn't pass the Women's Health Protection Act, that's not true. They couldn't vote on the Women's Health Protection Act because that's what the filibuster does. And so we're sitting here now as a government saying it is more important to preserve the rights of 40 US senators than it is to preserve the rights of 167 million American women. And shame on us, And, I think we've got yes, there are some members of my own party who think the filibuster is a good thing. And they're wrong, right? we gotta put pressure to go and keep elevating those issues. We also, it's important to understand that the framing that Alito used in his argument is way worse than I don't want to say just, because it is a massive problem. If we tell women that you are just vessels to bear children and everything else is forget about your lives, forget about your health, forget about everything else. But Alito's decision is even worse than that, or his ruling, because what he says is there is no fundamental right to privacy in the Constitution because the right to privacy is what was used to justify the protections of Roe. The right to privacy was previously used in Griswold to say that you have a right to access contraception. If you really want to massively increase the number of abortions in America, take away people's access to contraception, right? That right to privacy was what was used in Obergefell to say that the LGBTQ community has the right to marry who they love. So that right to privacy was what was used to say that the state could not involuntarily sterilize prisoners. Like, it is a huge, if you take that out, the precedent that can be argued from there is massive. And it is totalitarian, it is evil, it is disgusting, it is despicable. And we have the power in the legislative branch to fix it, unless we think that the most important thing in our society right now is the filibuster.
Thank you for that.
To get through all that without cursing. So I don't always do that.
I know you did a great job. I have another question about recent events. So I ask that you hold on to that because you might need it. Within the last couple of weeks, we've had not one, but two very well publicized gun massacres across our country, in New York and in Texas. And to be quite honest, it seems almost every weekend in Chicago we have issues. What are your thoughts on gun safety and what we can do better?
Oh, almost anything would be better, right? The first thing to recognize is I think there's this tendency to say, why can't we do anything? We have to acknowledge that it's not that we're not doing anything, we're going backwards. When the Supreme Court ruled in the Heller decision that they took this very bizarre, this was Scalia, took this very bizarre interpretation of the Second Amendment that's become the way we think about the Second Amendment right now, that you've got a right to, all this massive firepower and high capacity magazines and assault rifles and all the rest of this. That wasn't there prior to Heller. And I encourage everyone, it's easy to read. Go read Justice Stevens' dissent in that Heller case. That was a 5-4 ruling. And Stevens makes the argument, which would have been the law of the land if we had one more Supreme Court justice, where he says, that first bit about the militias kind of matters. Our founders were writing this in the context of saying, how do we defend our country when we don't have an income tax system, when we don't have a standing army? It mattered that our founders actually debated having an additional piece of language in that document, in that amendment, that provided a religious exemption to the right to keep and bear arms. That sounds bizarre, like your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless you have a religious exemption. And Stevens goes through to say, well, that's because in olden times, when we were talking about that, bearing arms meant to be compelled to bear arms for your government. That was the way that it was understood, and therefore the religious exemption mattered. And then we took it out because we already had that in the First Amendment. So we've actually gone backwards. We have become less safe since that ruling came through. So now we got too many damn guns. We don't have a mental health problem any more than any other country does, but we do give people access to deadly force that is just obscene. We have in Chicago issues somewhat unique around the fact that we have better gun laws than most states, but Indiana and Wisconsin don't. And so Robin Kelly and I have been leading an effort to try to get a package of anti-gun trafficking rules forward. There's no federal anti-trafficking statute right now. So if you bring that, that proverbial gun in from Indiana and commit a crime, you haven't violated a federal law in doing that. And so we've got a package of bills to do that, which is critical. We also need to have really hard conversations, and we've got some in this package we're pushing, about the fact that the best predictor that you are going to be a mass shooter is that you're a white man with a history of domestic violence. And we know, if you just think about that from an epidemiological perspective, if I told you, exposure to certain chemicals is likely to give you cancer, we'd say, let's take away those chemicals. Well, if I say, if you're a white man with a history of domestic violence and you got a propensity to go shoot people, we'd want to take guns away from those people, right? And we need to do that as well. I bring race into it because we're talking about Uvalde for the obvious reason that we're heartbroken and still can't bear the fact that these families who are going to bed this week with empty beds that had kids in them last week. But the frequency of these is coming so quick that I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that in Buffalo we had this disgusting replacement theory that was driving it. And if I told you pick a country that you have bad stereotypes of, if I say third world, poor Middle Eastern country, I don't know, pick whatever is your stereotype. I don't mean to judge you personally, but pick that country. And if I said to you, there's a major political group in that country that is telling people in their country that there is another tribe in their country who is the cause of all their troubles, and we need to get rid of that tribe, and we need to arm you in order to get rid of that tribe, and they're trying to destroy our country, you would say, well, those are terrorists, right? I just described the Republican Party view, right? When they're out there, Tucker Carlson is on the air, Elise Stefanik, who's the number 3 in leadership, who was saying that those people who are not white and Christian like me are trying to increase their numbers to take over our country. And we have to not let them vote, and we have to disenfranchise them. We have to, it's exactly the same rhetoric.
It
and
is.
One of my great fears of the way we talk about the Buffalo shooter is that if we talk about that as a hate crime, then the next question is, okay, what drove this man to hatred? If we talk about it as a terrorist, we say who funded him, who incited him, and who armed him. And we know the answers to those questions, don't we?
We do. We do. That's a great analogy. Thank you. Oh, all right. We're going to thank you for that answer. It was perfect. Kind of stuck me a little bit. This never happened. So next question. How can we apply some of the lessons that made you successful in the 2018 midterm election to the 2022 midterm election? How can we apply some of those things? Because, as folks like to point out, midterms are a little bit harder. So what are your goals here?
Well, obviously, you got to get Ken Mejia-Beal to come in and teach your field volunteers. I mean, that was.
I'll do it.
So I love the question in part because it gives me an excuse to tell you my most optimistic view on the November elections. What I've found in my my 3 years in Washington, is that there's a really fundamental difference in the not in the quality of the person, but in the type of person who flips a seat and the one who comes in a very partisan seat and wins a primary and comes in. And the difference is that for those of us who flipped seats, we would not have gotten in unless we told a story about our community and our district that was very inclusive of everyone, right? Roscoe won by 18, I won by 7. That means 25% of the voters changed teams. And that was on the same ballot, if you recall, in 18, that J.B. Pritzker lost by 5. J.B. won statewide very handily, of course, but and I'm not saying that because I'm an exceptional person. I'm saying I would not have won but for the fact that we, our campaign, had the ability to communicate in ways that said we are solid, robust Democrats. The whole Democratic base is behind us, but also we have a view of the country that is inclusive enough to attract people who have historically voted Republican. And some of my very high profile colleagues who came in with me in 2018, by beating Democratic incumbents and winning primaries, it's been interesting. I count them as friends, and it's been interesting to watch them grow because they came into Congress with having alienated a certain block of their own party and not appealing to the other side. And I don't say that with judgment. These are people like AOC, Ayanna Pressley, who are rock stars relative to me, but they've had to sort of come in and figure out, they beat someone who was very popular, who had friends in Congress, and you have to build those bridges and go through. It takes a little bit of time. And I say that in response to your question. The reason why I say this is a source of optimism is that Biden's polling numbers are underwater. But we did some polling recently, and among those members who are in seats that are members of the House that are in seats that are D+5 or less. So yours truly, people like Lauren Underwood, Abby Spanberger, Tom Malinowski, Andy Kim, Jared Golden, all of those those frontliners in the parlance. We are collectively polling 14 points ahead of the president against a generic Republican. And those are the seats that the House is going to be won or lost on. And I don't think that result is all that surprising because all of us got in because we told a story about the country that was accommodating of all. And I think I say that, as far as lessons you could learn, that I think if you have an abiding trust in our democracy, you are a Democrat with a capital and a lowercase d. Having an abiding trust in democracy implicitly means that you can tell a story that says to every single voter, I am completely confident that the majority of you are right. And let's talk about the issues and dive in. And you don't really have the incentive to speak that way unless you're in purple districts. But I think that's the key to how we hold seats like this. It's also the key to how we stay optimistic in these moments because, the Senate was designed to be non-representative. The Supreme Court is not elected, but the majority of Americans keep voting Democrat. Remember, January 6th doesn't happen if the bad guys win. It only happened because they lost, right? So
That's true.
So take faith in the fact that the majority of the American people share our values, have good character, agree with where we want to go as a country, and communicate in a way that conveys that respect and that trust in their judgment. Because that was our founders' idea, right? And it's worked so far. And look what the Republican Party is doing. They're not sitting there saying, yeah, like this horse medicine and storming the Capitol is a good message. They're out there telling people who they control, you need to make it harder for certain people to vote. They fundamentally do not trust democracy. So our job in this moment is to make sure that we do.
And I know you are a strong advocate for climate protection as well. Can you talk about some of the work that you've done, that you've been doing to, I hate to say solve the climate crisis because it makes it sound like it's all you, but there you have it. What are we doing to kind of solve the climate crisis?
Uh, well, both not enough and also I think more than we've ever done. The work that the climate committee did that I sit on, and I don't know whether this is depending on which staffer I talk to, this is either a point of pride or a point of frustration. They beat me up that I put more red ink on that report than any of the other members as we were going through and editing it. But that report we did became basically the guts of Biden's climate plan, which is now the thing that we are calling the climate provisions of Build Back Better. And I am cautiously optimistic that we've got a path with Senator Manchin to bring that through. If we get that forward, we will reduce US CO2 emissions by something on the order of 40% by 2050, which is a massive number. And it's about 40% of what's necessary. But it's more than we've ever done. And a big part of what that does that I think finally gets the conversation right is that it recognizes that our challenge to getting to a zero carbon economy is not a question of forcing people to operate more expensive sources of energy. It's just a matter of deploying clean energy because the clean energy is always cheaper. Some of the people listening here probably have electric vehicles. My guess is that, if you're like my house, when you go outside and you want to see if the EV is there, it's always taken because everyone in your family likes to drive that one more than they like to drive the other car. If you've got a solar panel on your roof, you leave it running as long as the sun is shining. You don't sit there and say, I wonder if it makes economic sense to run it today. And so what we've really done in the Build Back Better and a lot of the other things we've been working on is saying, let's just get the rules in place that accelerate the deployment of these technologies with the confidence that they are going to clean the clock of the dirty technologies that are out there. I have some fun teasing some of my Republican colleagues that, given as we subsidize the fossil fuel by $650 billion a year, and they're still losing market share to clean energy, and they want to keep subsidizing them. To my way of thinking, that sounds like socialism, and I'd like you to join me on team capitalism. That's what we stand for, right? Let's allow business, and a part of what we're seeing happening, and I say that because I'm a wise ass. I also say it because it's true. Go and look, if some of you got an internet browser open, go and pull up Tesla's share price, even after all the goofy, dumb stuff that Elon Musk has done over these last couple of weeks. I think it's trading at like 30 or 40 times earnings. Wow. Then go and look at Exxon's share price. Exxon is trading at 6 or 7 times earnings. In other words, public markets are saying to the Exxon managers, I do not trust you with my money. I do not trust that if you make an investment, you will build something that the American people want. But the people making things that don't rely on fossil fuel, I want to put my money with them, right? And that's in spite of all the carnage that Elon Musk has done to their share price this week. And I can show that for a whole lot of other places. So we're seeing private capital move in the right direction. We're working to accelerate that movement. And then we're also working to try to make sure that that transition doesn't leave folks behind. If you think about it just in Illinois, where's all the job creation in Illinois? It's not downstate, right? And those parts of Illinois that were historically dependent on coal are coming to be dependent now on wind, which is pretty cool. But what do you say to the community that depended on the coal mine for their jobs, for their employment, for their sense of dignity, if there are no longer jobs in that town, but now there are jobs in a different part of the state or in a different part of the country? Sure, we should give those people opportunities to retrain and relocate, but we also have to acknowledge that there's something a little bit patronizing about saying, I know you have all of these skills in a complicated industry, getting fossil fuels out of the ground. You should go back to community college at age 52 and learn how to do thin film deposition in a solar plant, right? If they want to, of course, but let's not patronize them. And so let's make sure that all of this wealth we're creating in this transition is equitably shared through our society, because at the end of the day, it's that fear which makes this transition politically hard.
I have one more question for you. I like for the last question to be slightly fun. So one of the question that I picked was, if you could go on tour with any artist or band, who would it be? Here's the thing though, sir, I know that you would pick Bruce Springsteen, so I have a different question for you. So you are on tour with the boss and you get to pick the opening act. Who is the opening act on this tour?
Oh, all right. So it's gotta be number one, like opening for Springsteen. That's a tough
Yeah.
gig, right?
Yeah,
Like
it sure is.
So, you got to be able to get the crowd on their feet. I think you've got to be someone who, who's going to leave people sweaty and knowing that, like, whoever comes next is going to blow the roof off, right? So, and it's got to be someone who I think has sort of enough of a genre overlap.
Mm-hmm.
How about Mavis Staples? That'd be good.
All right.
Get a good vibe into the soul. Like, I'll bet she'd be awesome. Probably come on and sing a couple songs. I mean, look, if I'm given as I've already like playing the piano in the E Street Band, which is great.
Right.
Like, why not like also be like, hey Bruce, let me just audible in here. Can I do a little? Come on, bring her back out.
It's your tour. I would go.
Yeah.
I'd be all for it.
Awesome. Well, she's a local, so Mavis, if you're
Yes.
watching, I can clear my schedule this summer. We'll get together.
Let's make it happen. Congressman Casten, if folks want to volunteer for your campaign, donate a couple of dollars, where can they go to do that?
CastenForCongress.com. Or of course, you are always welcome over at the campaign office over on Belmont Ave, just south of the tracks in Downers Grove.
There we go. Thank you so much for your time, Congressman Casten. I want everyone to have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for joining Chair Chat. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. I'll take you there. Take care, Al.